I'm recording this video while the moon is in Libra on November 2nd, which means pretty soon coming up on November 4th, we have a new moon in Scorpio. Now, this isn't just your average new moon in Scorpio by any means. This is actually quite a significant new moon because, for one thing, the new moon has a perfect opposition with the planet Uranus. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, this is a screenshot that I took of the moment when the new moon is exact. And as you can see here, we've got both the moon and the sun at a 12 degrees, and at the other side of the zodiac, we have the planet Uranus at 12 degrees. If you go down to the minute, the sun and the moon are at 12:40, and Uranus is at 12:47. But even, that's still a pretty damn close opposition, I would say. Now, when I was trained on how to handle outer planets, I was taught to use a very tight orb with them, not to really consider anything that's out of, even just like a couple degrees orb. So the fact that we're having a new moon in a perfect opposition at the 12-degree point is something worth considering on its own. Now, I'm more or less a traditional astrologer, and I tend to focus more on the planets, the traditional 7 planets. But I think this will be a kind of a textbook example of the role of Uranus, because in an opposition where it's making this opposition at the beginning of a lunar cycle at the new moon point, it kind of suggests that this is going to color the whole lunation that we're heading towards. Is going to be flavored by this opposition to Uranus. Mars is also there, and Mars is going to be creating an opposition as well to Uranus, which could be difficult, as well as setting off that square to Saturn. The other thing which is worth mentioning, which sets this particular lunation apart from other lunations, is that when it culminates, we'll go to the next slide here, it culminates in a full moon lunar eclipse that happens to be nearly perfectly conjunct the fixed star Algol. Now, if they don't put the fixed stars on the zodiac wheel, so here I've included a little graphic that I stole from Astrology King. I can't say that I'm any fixed star expert, but if you go to him, I might even read a bit off of his page here in a sec. But he gives some pretty good explanations of the fixed stars and lists their locations in the tropical zodiac. If you want to get technical about it, if you were using the actual constellations, Algol would fall in the constellation of Gemini, but the sign, what we talk about in terms of signs, it changes slowly over the course of time. I don't need to get into all that technical stuff, do I? But the point is, anyways, if you see here, when the sun is at 27 degrees Scorpio, the moon will be reaching its culmination of fullness at 27 degrees Taurus, and the fixed star Algol is only at 26 degrees Taurus. So it's right beside the full moon conjunct Algol, which, if that wasn't bad enough on its own, it's also a lunar eclipse. So it's like, this is a pretty gnarly lunar cycle, basically. Both the new moon is completely opposite Uranus, and the full moon is conjunct Algol. We're in for a hell of a ride, I would say. Now, rather than just me giving vague warnings about Algol, maybe I will actually read off of the Astrology King's website here for a second. Okay, so this is the Astrology King's website. I'm not going to read all of what he has to say here, but just to give you an idea of why this is a big deal, not positive at all, what he has to say is, in astrology, Algol is one of the most unfortunate stars. Ptolemy referred to it as the Gorgon of Perseus and associated with death by decapitation, mirroring the myth of the hero Perseus's victory over the snake-headed Gorgon Medusa. Historically, it has received a strong association with violence across a wide variety of cultures. Medieval Arabic commanders tried to ensure that no important battle began whilst the light of Algol was weak. It may be connected to the periodic lucky prognosis of in an ancient Egyptian calendar for lucky and unlucky days composed about 3,200 years ago. The 17th century English astrologer William Lilly regarded any planet to be afflicted when within 5 degrees of conjunction. So, if you remember back when we were looking at the full moon is within 1 degree of conjunction, so it's definitely within being afflicted by Algol. Astrologers, of course, said it was the most unfortunate, violent, and dangerous star in the heavens. The most, this isn't just like up there. They're saying that the most unfortunate, violent, and dangerous star this month, and it certainly has been one of the best observed as the most noteworthy variable in the northern sky. So I don't know exactly about how much that I have to read about this, but it says fixed star Algol is the nature of Saturn and Jupiter, dignified, pious, conservative, acquisitive, retentive. It causes misfortune, violence, decapitation, hanging, electrocution, and mob violence, and gives a dogged and violent nature that causes death to the native or others. It is the most evil star in the heavens. Like, they're pretty extreme about this one. And, I mean, apparently it might give you some good things if you're into, like, witchcraft and black magic and making whatever. But we're not going to get into that right now. It's also connected to the same root word as alcohol. So it sort of has this sort of quality of kind of like a foul, evil spirit or a kind of drunken mob violence, mob mentality, kind of like off with her head, like the angry mob, but not really, not really the most cheery, positive force to be working with by any means. Now, before we get too ahead of ourselves with that Algol business, I mean, that is the full moon lunar eclipse, so it's a couple weeks from now, but more immediately we have this new moon, which is a perfect opposition to Uranus. And I thought I'd just go over a bit of what that means. Now, Uranus, I kind of go with Rick Tarnas. He says that the archetype of Uranus, even though named after Uranus, the sky god, actually has more close in similarity to Prometheus, this kind of idea of taking the fire from the gods, being a kind of liberator who's trying to do good things for mankind, but it's kind of has this rebellious, disruptive quality. What I've noticed in my more recent, personal I was just going through the hospital and I noticed when there was strong Uranus aspects happening, like the moon conjunct Uranus or Venus opposite Uranus, there would be the idea of technology, like a technological solution being implemented, or an interesting technological workaround for a problem. Something that came up for me that I noticed from my own keeping track of things, and that it's also the meaning of these outer planets were formed kind of by looking at what was coming up in historical circumstance when the planets were discovered. And when Uranus discovered, there was a lot of technological innovation, as well as there was rebellion in the air with the various revolutions towards democracy and stuff like that. So Uranus has taken on a kind of character of being a innovator, a liberator, but also something that rebels and disrupts against the status quo. So when you put that together with Taurus is a fixed earth sign. We kind of think of Taurus as the bull, as being the kind of stable, dependable, kind of like a rock thing that you rely on. The earth kind of comes in there with being more material focused, being like our material resources, and that fixed quality being that stable, the stability and security. And I think when we're already seeing these Uranus Taurus themes playing out with things like supply chain disruptions. There's some questions about different consumer goods, about how much we have access to and how we're being affected by the pandemic. Whether that's things like computer parts. I know technology is really disrupted by this. I don't know if different kind of if we're gonna have our things like food or fuel. To be honest, I'm not as up on all this kind of stuff, but just as from an astrologer point of view, these kinds of basic resources and our access to them are things that I would expect to be maybe disrupted. Another thing is that I think with the emancipatory liberator quality of Uranus, you can see coming out in the labor movements in the United States. We have things like Hollywood, the film industry striking. I've seen memes going around. That's where I get most of my news, is from memes, from the John Deere, the agricultural equipment, tractors and stuff like that. The big green and yellow. I'm sure you're all familiar with. All those guys are going on strike, and that struck me as being a very Taurian example, because it's bringing that agricultural thing with the Uranus influence. This year we've had an ongoing protest in Vancouver Island around logging. There's a certain area called Fairy Creek which has been contested, and the protesters are very stubbornly resisting the logging companies there. So there could be the various environmental protests. There's also some things with pipelines going around in Canada, up in northern BC. Indigenous land versus pipeline, and we have the earth, the Taurian earth versus the liberator of Uranus in play. Another factor could be Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. That's always a popular one that people mention with Uranus and Taurus. I think there's room for that also to be a kind of a Mercury thing rather than just a Venus Earth sign, but it does have that. It is very Uranian because you're bringing in the technological innovation that not only takes things a step further, but it also kind of disrupts what we're used to as being a kind of the status quo of how we deal with our finances is being disrupted by a new technology. And now I've got friends who are much more into the cryptocurrency thing than I am. I'm really, people are trying to talk me to get into it and stuff like that, but I'm kind of ignorant. So I'm not watching very closely the exact ups and downs of the market. But with Uranus, one of the things they say is like expect the unexpected. It's some kind of shocks and disruptions. So between this and the full moon lunar eclipse, I would not expect stability. It would not really be a sound time for making investments. I would say it's pretty risky. You might stand to lose money. It's kind of a tumultuous time we're heading into. Because this Uranus is not only, like I have in the note there, it's not only having this eclipse cycle, it's also going to be getting hammered from an opposition from Mars. And Mars is also going to be hitting off the square with Saturn as well. It's generally a rough time for all of this. So that's basically what I've got prepared. Hopefully you find this interesting. This is a kind of a quick one on Uranus and Taurus and the lunar cycle we're heading into.